Hello and welcome everyone in another episode of Researcher Celebrity. Today we have Dr. Vamsi Nalam with us. A brief about Dr. Vamsi. He has done his bachelor's in University of Agricultural Sciences GKBK Bangalore, and then for pursuing his master's he moved to United States where he did his master's in crop sciences from Oregon State University, and then following the passion for the research, Dr. Vamsi joined PhD in molecular biology at University of North Texas, which is in Texas, and then moved to Purdue University as an assistant professor. Currently, at Colorado State University, Dr. Vamsi is in Department of Agricultural Biology and do his research on plant interactions with insect, pest, and pathogens. With this brief introduction, I would welcome Dr. Vamsi at the platform.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vamsi, for taking time out and giving us this opportunity where different young brains in India can get benefited on your experience, whatever you have to share. So the first question, how we start our Researcher Celebrity series is that how and when you decided to be a researcher.
Okay. So I grew up on the campus of the Indian Institute of Science because my father was a professor at the Indian Institute of Science, although he was an engineer. So ever since I was young, science seemed like the only career path for me because all my friends, their fathers, their mothers, everybody was involved in science in some form or another. And also because of my father, I had this habit of reading a lot from a very early age. So when I was 12 or 13, for the first time in my life, I read Jurassic Park, the book, and that book changed the direction or gave me a direction of what I wanted to do. It was very fascinating to me that you could take genes, manipulate it however you want, and create an entire organism like a dinosaur. But so that ignited the passion to learn more about how genes work, genetics, biotechnology, and all through after that, everything that I did was pursuing towards that goal of becoming a researcher and studying doing biotechnology. So with that in mind, even though my father is an engineer, my sister is an engineer, I decided that I wanted to do biology. And I went into the 4-year agriculture program because I did not want to work on animals. I thought that it was unethical to try to change it with less knowledge right at that time at least. So I thought it would be best to work with plants, and I did my bachelor's in agricultural science, which expanded my world to this whole new area that I had no familiarity with because I grew up in the city in Bangalore, which is, as you know, a high-tech city, the Silicon Valley of India, but that exposed me to people from all over Karnataka and people, children of farmers, and they were growing crops themselves. And that further solidified my interest to do something to try to help them. And so as I was doing my bachelor's, this solidified. And the main thing that made it more interesting to me was to first try to understand what genes do in a plant. Because without that knowledge, manipulating the genes will not lead to anything useful. So then I started reading about mechanisms, plant physiology, and understanding how the genes influence different pathways. And as I did my bachelor's and master's, my area of interest became more and more focused on studying how plants interact with their pests and pathogens. The way I look at it is that the pests and pathogens are communicating with each other. And if we figure out a way to stop their communication, then we can create a plant which is resistant to that pest and pathogen in a more sustainable manner than spraying pesticides or fungicides onto the crop. So that, in brief, was my history of and why I'm fascinated with this area of research.
Okay. So now, after completion of the bachelor's, there were a couple of choices, obviously. And what were the reasons that you moved to United States in the first, and then how it was different to conduct research in India?
So in India, after my bachelor's, coming to the United States was just one of my options. After you finish your bachelor's when you're doing your bachelor's, you can apply for the ICAR examination, which will place you in research institutions or agriculture schools all over the country. My area of research, area of the examination was plant physiology and biotechnology. But in the year that I took it, there was some kind of mishap with the exam, and everybody in my university got ranked very, very low. So that made it so that I would not be placed in a higher school. There was something to do with an answers where match the following. The examiners wanted it one way, but we were given instructions to do it another way. So every single answer for that was wrong, and we lost 50 points straight off the bat. I still remember it vividly in my mind because my original intention was never to come to the United States. It was to stay in India. And I only applied to the United States as a backup, not as my first choice. But because the ICR examination did not go through, and I got full support to do my master's in crop science at Oregon State University. This was just 3 months after my PhD. After I finished my bachelor's, I got the letter. So I decided to forego the placement with the ICAR because I would not be placed in a school of my choice, but rather somewhere where I did not want to be. I decided to come to the United States.
Nice. So now this brings us to another question that most of the researchers in India currently, and I can see how it also stands true for most of the researchers outside the world, that they start pursuing something like the research questions which fascinated them for a long time. But due to either funding shortage or the lab environment, there are so many other things involved in it that they somehow either divert their interest, or they just move to switch to something else just because they did not get enough opportunities in the same field. So if you can talk a little bit about these issues.
So I should say I've been, for the most part, very lucky, but I have heard of situations where students have had very tough situations with their advisors or issues at home that they need to go back to and not able to come back. Some things are unavoidable, unfortunately, that you can't, these circumstances you cannot see. But I feel the things that are in your hand, the most important thing is for you to be passionate about your work and to do a sincere job at it. So if you do that, the vast majority of advisors or professors that you're working with will see that and will appreciate it. There will still always be a few with whom it's just not compatible on a personal level. So in those cases, it would be best that the student and the advisor have a talk in the beginning itself. I mean, as soon as possible, and try to look for alternatives. So I have had students with whom that we knew that initially in the interview everything went well, but once they came here, I knew that it would not work out well, and then we helped each other find other opportunities that would not be detrimental to the student or to me. For this, I think the very important conversation that you need to have with your student in the beginning itself is to align your expectations of them and what they expect from you. If you didn't, I never, and when I was doing my PhD or master's, I never had those kinds of conversations. And then coming from India, we always take that the teacher is God, right? So you always listen to what they say, and that might lead to some clashes at certain time. But no matter where you are from in the world, you have to have a conversation with your advisor about aligning each other's expectations. What do you expect from them? What they expect from you? If you do that, at least professionally, that will solve a vast majority of your problems, because then both of you start on the same page.
Absolutely. And this is something which I always try to tell to all the researchers, all the audience here, that having the conversation for expectation, what the supervisor expects from you, and also you have some expectations that when you are picking a group, a specific PI, then you really want to pursue some of the research questions which might not be at the focus of the lab at that point of time, but you can always divert or add your interest into the lab so that the lab grows and you still can pursue what you really are focused on and want to work on. So,
Exactly.
Dr. Vamsi,
Yeah.
you mentioned about that how you were very specific about not going for any other second school for your masters in India, but to move to United States to pursue the field you wanted to, interested in for your masters. Then
Right.
the story from masters to PhD, how that started, and then we will talk about the journey of the PhD.
Yes. So during my master's, my research project was to work on wheat. I was very interested in wheat because it was an important crop. So I applied only to people who were working in the area of that I was interested in. My advisor at that time, he had a research project to identify genes that were involved in domesticating wheat. That was not really my interest, but still, I had full fellowship and I grew to love that project. Uh, so I started working on that, and then I established I developed quite good knowledge about how wheat evolved and what were the genes involved, and that led to several publications from that group. So it was still an aspect of plant physiology. It was not just identifying what the gene was, but also to see how that gene changed the structure of the plant to allow it to get to give it more characteristics that allow it for us to harvest in time. For example, grasses, when they grow, the spikes will just break apart so that the seed can spread for a long distance. In wheat, that does not happen because we want to collect the spike for our benefit. So there had to be a change in that gene. So we not only at that time, gene cloning in wheat was very, very difficult. So we only identified a region of the genome where the gene would be, and then I also did some studies to see how the cellular structure changed. What changed in that? Was it more lignin or was it more cell walls that were being formed that prevented that spike from breaking apart into smaller pieces? So
Mm-hmm.
that was the story of my PhD.
So now we will talk about the suggestions, if you can make the words of wisdom, what we call, for those students who are in the process of finalizing a lab to do a PhD or a postdoc.
Yes.
In phase one, we'll talk about this, and then we will talk about the struggle to get the faculty positions.
Yes, so this is very important. This is dear to my heart because in the last 3 or 4 months, I have received at least 100 applications from students from all over the world to apply. The unfortunate thing is, even though they write a good story or try to write a good story, out of the 100, I would say that 98 of them, this is 100 is an approximate number, but 98 of them have copied exactly what I have on my webpage and pasted it as their research interest, which is not the
Okay.
way to sell yourself
Mm-hmm.
to a new faculty, sell yourself to a faculty to be accepted. So, for example, I applied for all of these a long time ago, not any time recently, but every time I did, I read their papers. You don't need to read all of them. Just read one research paper that they have published that is of interest to you and highlight one thing from there that you found interesting, but not just copy, because I wrote those words on my webpage, so I know exactly where you got them from. So don't copy and paste those. So this makes me feel very bad that there are many promising students, but just that one thing turns it off, that application for me, so much that I do not want to contact them further because
Mm-hmm.
of just this thing that I know that they apply for 5 or 6 schools, but it still is worth the effort to personalize your letter that you write to each faculty.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure that you read at least one paper. Make sure that you understand. So, like some students have told me that they like my work that I did in my PhD. That's fine, but that is not my work anymore. My current work has evolved from there because I'm not in that lab. I'm in my own lab now. So they need
Mm-hmm.
to be aware of that too. So pay attention to the more recent papers that are being published. You can mention the older papers, but also
Mm-hmm.
mention the more recent papers and why you like those and why you would be interested in something like that, not just copy paste from the website.
And I believe this stands true for PhD applicants as well as for the postdocs if they are looking for opportunities in your lab.
Yes, for PhD, yeah, for PhD and postdoc, if they send me a copy paste of what I have there, it is an immediate delete. For at least undergraduate students, I understand that they may
Mm-hmm.
not be exposed to all of this, so I give them a little more benefit.
Mm-hmm.
and a benefit of doubt, and I look through their application and everything and only then say yes or no. But for PhD and postdoc, if they just do that copy paste thing and it is not specific to a particular project, then I just hit delete and no more.
So now let's talk about so in India, we always talk about how there are very few, or now they are becoming rare opportunities to get to faculty positions, or to get established in either, like, 30s is a dream now. What is practical is, like, in 40s people are going to get positions, like when they say that okay, now we are settled.
Mm-hmm.
So I will ask about, because you have done most of your master education, like apart from bachelor's in India, everything is out. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that you might be in some contact with your students who came back to India and then have established their lab, or researchers vice versa, moving here to United States. What are your nutshells, if you have to guide a postdoc, that if when they are applying for faculty positions, what are the things which should be in the core of their applications?
So I can speak more about that with respect to how it is in the US. In India, I know that a few of my friends have gone through this process and they're right now faculty in different agricultural schools everywhere. For them, it has been a struggle, but I think the requirements and the things that go on behind for hiring in India is very different from here. At least that is my perspective. In the United States, especially if you're applying for a faculty position, you have to make sure that you have a good publication record. It doesn't need to be in really high impact journals or anything, but it needs to show if you're a postdoc, and you've spent a year in a lab somewhere, we expect you to have at least two publications per year. For a PhD student, it is little less, but so let's say you had a 4-year PhD, I would expect at least 3 papers to be there. So that is what search committees that are looking at faculty uh, look at. So you have to be able to show that your research record is strong, and as a postdoc, you also need to have contributed to grant writing. It is very difficult to um, be on a grant as a postdoc. Not many faculty everywhere allow their postdocs to be as co-PIs on a grant, but I think that's a very important feather in the cap of a postdoc who's applying for a position, to have some grant writing experience. And for all of these things, the most important thing to have is to enjoy writing, because the only way that you can be a great researcher and you can find brilliant new things that will solve everything, but if you're not able to sell it and write it in a way that other people can understand, it is of no use. You have to be able to communicate your science to the general public. So if you want to become a researcher, that is, I think, the number one skill that you should learn: how to write well to a diverse audience. Because you have to write to funding agencies to ask for money. You have to write your findings in a paper that will impact a wide variety of audiences. And then you also have to write so that you address stakeholders, that people who are vested in whatever that you are working with. So you have to be able to write in such a way that you can do all of that. For me, till now, I've spent so many years in science. This biggest struggle is writing. It is every day is a struggle, and every day I'd like to write. I would be happiest just sitting on a bench and doing all my experiments and have somebody else write it. But once you become a faculty, you cannot avoid that. Because you
Yeah.
want to direct. If you want that independence to do what research you think interests you, you have to be able to support yourself. So yeah,
So,
so I would recommend every student, master's, PhD, undergraduate student, to take courses in creative writing,
mhm.
because that will help you. Creative writing, scientific writing. There are free courses available in like Coursera and different MOOC platforms that you can take. And you can pay. It's for Coursera, for example. It's, I think, a $40 fee. If you complete the course, you get a certificate that you can put in with your application. Till now, I haven't seen one student who has done a course like this, because I think that is the number one skill. I can teach you how to do laboratory experiments, but I cannot teach
Mhm.
you to write very well because I myself am learning that scale.
So
So
this
yeah.
transparency, when you say, brings us to next question about researchers as communicators, because in general public who are
Mhm.
not actively in research, they think that scientists, because for them, like researchers, this doesn't matter in which field you are, but they
Mhm.
think that scientists are the crazy people. Okay. And they think that they don't have a normal regular schedule or routine. The way they work is one thing, but when it comes about the communications,
Mhm.
in recent times people have started giving it due acknowledgement that how it is very important to communicate your science with the general audience who are
Mhm.
not very technical about your topic. And so this is one part of the being scientist as a communicator, whereas the other part which you a little bit elaborated, that about publications in
Mhm.
high impact journals, in or just publication in general, doesn't
Yes.
matter, the impacts were there.
Yeah.
So how do you see these two things different, and how crucial they are in any researcher at their any stage of the career?
I think they're both very, very important because uh, here, most of the funding is from the public. So if you write to the USDA, NSF, or any other stakeholder group, they are public. A stakeholder group, for example, I work a lot with potato pathogens. And for me, the stakeholder group is the potato growers. All the potato growers in this region donate money from their harvest, a portion of their harvest to this central potato organization, which then funds research because each region has their own specific problems. There are a variety of stakeholder groups like this. So I have to be able to communicate to them what I did and why I did it. They are more informed than a general audience because they are growers. Most of the times they know more about growing everything, potatoes, than you do. Because they've spent their lifetime in there, but you still have to be able to communicate with them. I cannot tell them about if I do this to this gene, this will happen. I have to be in a more general way to give them an idea that, okay, what I'm doing is important because it will give you this answer. So it is very important to communicate to these groups. And when you apply to a funding agency, the panel that looks at your grant usually are not just experts in your field. They are experts in their own field, but a related field. So you'll have to be right. You'll have to be able to write in such a way that you can convince them across the board. Like I might write, I'm, I might write a grant about plants and insects, but the panelist may be somebody who's an expert on plant defenses only and knows nothing, not does not know much about insects, and they may not be convinced that okay, insects are not that important. But you have to be able to write that they can understand what you are telling. So to be successful in obtaining funding, you have to be able to write to a slightly different kind of audience which can
Mhm.
understand everything. But and then when you write a manuscript or a paper which will get published in a specific journal, you have to be able to write to scientists, other experts in your field can understand that and know the importance of that. And at the same time, also to write it to a general audience. So it's a very difficult skill, I feel, that people should learn, but you should start developing this from a pretty young age. I think
Mhm.
from your bachelor's, at least in US, uh, we had in the fourth year we spent almost a month in a village where we speak to the villagers about how whatever techniques were taught to us, we speak it to them. We have to be able to speak to them and not as a classroom. So that is a skill I think the University of Agricultural Sciences does provide, but it's in a slightly different context. But that at that time I did not realize the importance of it, but now I think that that training that I got really helped me to speak to the growers, not just there but also over here.
Nice. So now we will talk about the Indian native crops, and you being, having the experience of doing research in India and in United States, and then talking to farmers in both of the countries. So my first question will be like about the native crops and how I have seen in India over the period of 4 to 5 decades that the crops have been changed so drastically that when I was a kid, I have seen my grandfathers, growing at least 5 to 10 different varieties of or different crops, but now it is mostly just rice and wheat. Okay,
Mhm.
that has changed so much. There is no sugarcane, no lentils or peas, chickpeas, mustards, legumes are almost gone in there. The effect of these changes for soil and for the ecosystem.
So yeah, you're right. Things have been changing. People are planting more crops just to get more money out of it and not actually look at the soil. So if you just continue to plant one or two crops all through the year, you know very well that the soil health is going to get completely destroyed. You have to make sure that you plant a different variety of crops to add nitrogen back into the soil and those kinds of things. But even over here, I think I'm beginning to see the United States is famous for its large, massive farms where they just grow one or two crops because they don't want to buy equipment to harvest other things. They just do that and keep growing that. But even here, I'm seeing that there is getting more and more emphasis on getting native grains, alternate source of carbohydrates. Like quinoa is growing in importance, and the millets are people are starting to discover those. In India, I'm not that familiar with the agricultural systems anymore because, again, I've been out of there for 20 years. The last time I went to a field in India was when I was doing my bachelor's. And the region where I was, they were growing mainly ragi
Mm-hmm.
because it was a dry land crop, and that was the ragi and mulberry were the two things that they could grow over there. But I don't know much about how it has been changing, but that is not good. I think the more variety there is, the better it would be for the soil. But I think this is driven beyond the control of the farmer to a certain extent. He will not be able to sell many of his varieties if he grows different kinds of crops. He may not be able to find a market. And also, I think now seed companies provide you start to end packages. So you
Mm-hmm.
buy the seeds from them, and then you just do that, and that leaves you with fewer options. Also, I'm not sure in India how many farmers are still storing their own seed and growing them, but
Mm-hmm.
rather go every season to a seed merchant and buy his seeds and or seed company and
Yes.
buy his seeds and do that.
So now let's talk about the possibilities. So in India now, the agricultural institutes are coming up front and using transgenics also.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see transgenics in, okay, let's talk about the world in general, and then we'll talk about a little bit about India, but keeping the natural system in the nutshell, the main importance that how the these crop limitations are affecting the nation in a way when we are talking about use of extensive insecticides or pesticides to control, and then about the biocontrol part, how
Mm-hmm.
the transgenic crops give an opportunity or the challenges for sustainable farming.
Okay, so I'm because my interest is biotechnology, my answer is transgenic crops are the future. They reduce the breeding time by a really large number. For a crop, if you want to release a line by traditional breeding, it might take 15 years, but with a transgenic crop, you will be able to get it in 1 or 2 years.
Mhm.
So I believe transgenics are the future, but at the same time, you have to be careful about what genes you introduce in there. And that for that reason, you need to understand what every single gene in a plant does.
Mhm.
So I think that is very important to do. Um, so once you understand that, I think transgenic technology will be a lot more applicable to every field. But I know that a lot of people everywhere don't like transgenic crops. In the United States, we grow a lot of transgenic crops mainly for herbicide tolerance because they
Mhm.
do not have the labor to go and remove the weeds. You put a herbicide tolerance gene in there, and then you spray a ton of herbicides, and that's the main thing that is grown over here. But I think it needs to move on to insect resistance, virus resistance, and fungus resistance because just one small little gene in a plant can provide the same level of resistance that you will get by spraying a very harmful insecticide that can not only kill that insect, kill all the other insects, and also in some cases kill you. So I think people need to understand that if we use transgenics, we can reduce the amount of insecticide and agrochemicals that we use by a huge quantity. So I think that is very, very important for people to keep in mind. But developing a transgenic crop and getting approvals for its planting is not a cheap process. It takes time. So it would be really good that a government agency anywhere in the world can actually run this. Right now, it is all controlled. Only private companies can pay that much money, can spend that much money. And so they would want to charge a premium and they can get control of the market. But in a place like India, where a lot of varieties are also being planted and the farms are not that big and much smaller, I worry that using transgenic crops will lose some of the diversity that we already have. In many cases, you can use different varieties maybe that are more tolerant. You don't need to spray an insecticide. You don't need to kill all the insects. You just use a variety of ragi or whatever crop you're planting that is a little more tolerant to that insect in that particular region. So for that, this is where I think agricultural universities should come into play and have an idea of what the insects are coming up each year and give a recommendation that plant this variety or the other variety, especially because I think smaller farmers will not be able to afford the cost of transgenic seeds.
Yeah. So now we're talking about the challenges and accomplishments of your journey till now, which you have then started in India and now in United States. So let's talk about the challenges first. That what were the challenges in your research which you faced?
Challenges with research are numerous. The plants, and you work with other living organisms. You work with plants and insects. Many times, they do not cooperate with you. So that is something that you have to take it in your stride. And if you get frustrated that those plants and insects are not cooperating with you, even though you might do everything that you possibly can do to maintain them, some things are out of your hand. For example, for my master's, which was supposed to take 2 years, I was working on the spike of wheat. So I would grow my plant, which would take around 3 months to grow to that spike before I could do any experiment on those plants. So those spikes then for 2 times this happened. So this is, no, 3 times it happened. So this is literally 9 months of work, of waiting time. Every time my spike grew, there was no seed in it. I don't know why, because I was fertilizing it. I didn't know why. I was fertilizing it. I was doing everything that I possibly could. Then the third time when this happened, I walked into the greenhouse, and I don't know how I missed it the previous times, but I found that it was closed because they were treating with sulfur. Sulfur is used to control powdery mildew in greenhouses, but they were treating with such a high dose of sulfur that it prevented seed fill of my spike. So I was not getting the trait that I wanted because the seeds in there, because somebody else was treating my plants without me knowing that they were treating it with such a high dose. This made me lose 9 months of my master's. So you can't allow that to get frustrated. I could have said, okay, forget it, I'm not going to do it. But I persisted and then finished my master's with a very good publication record. And then in my PhD too, there were 2 instances during my PhD where my advisor moved labs. Once we moved from Kansas State to University of North Texas, that involved us, not just me, all our group together to establish new growth conditions, new parameters. For that time, we were working with plants and Arabidopsis and aphids. So we had to make sure that they grow in these new conditions pretty well and do all of that. And then once we reached University of North Texas, they moved to another brand new building, and we had to redo that whole process again. So all of these things took time, which makes you very frustrated. If everything went ideally for me, my PhD and master's would have been finished at least 3 years before. But these things happen when you're working with living organisms, and they are beyond your control to a certain extent. So you just have to learn to persevere, take it in your stride, and understand that they are living things. They will not do the thing what you want them to do all the time.
Absolutely. So now let's talk about the accomplishments, the sense of achievement when you feel after overcoming all these challenges.
I'm still on my path towards that journey. But along this path, I feel I have accomplished quite a few things. For example, in my master's, the publications that I had then are getting cited even now, which tells me that that work is valued, and they're still trying to identify that gene. I couldn't identify that gene, but they still haven't found it even after 20 years of research on that field. But that publication still gets cited many times, which shows that people are reading it. And then during my PhD, I worked on multiple projects. This is another thing, maybe an advice to PhD students: do not confine yourself to just one project. Work with others so you expand your base of knowledge, and also you learn a lot more. So I worked on wheat and a fungal disease on wheat that did not become part of my dissertation. And that work, we developed transgenic wheat. So we know for certain which genes will provide, if you put them into the wheat plant, the plant will become more resistant to the fungus without having to apply any fungicide, anything. But unfortunately, transgenic wheat is not permitted to be grown, so we cannot do that. But it's there. We know the genes, and the day it's allowed, we can easily release those transgenic lines. And then I also worked on the role of oxidized lipids in plant pathogen interaction. And the main thing that we found was with aphids. So the rest of my career after that is focusing more and more on aphids. But what we found is that aphids rely on certain chemicals in a plant to be able to identify where their mouth part is in the plant. Like a mosquito, an aphid is like a mosquito. A mosquito feeds on you, sucks the blood, but how does it know that it is in the blood? It needs to recognize it somehow. So the same thing for an aphid. An aphid lands on a plant, it tries to go to the phloem and drink from there, but how does it know it is over there? And how does it know it's drinking from the xylem? So we discovered some chemicals which are present in there that allow the aphid to feed, to recognize where it is. So I think that is a pretty and good sense of accomplishment that I have from there. And after that, I've worked quite a bit with aphids only, and found a lot of different things that people maybe have overlooked, and but we actually showed them in through work that this is actually what is happening. And more recently, our work, this work, in fact, just today morning, I was working on finalizing the paper for this, but we found that there is a influence of the day and the night on how aphids interact with plants. So aphids do certain behaviors in the daytime, and they do other behaviors at the nighttime. So our goal is to see whether if we can understand these day and night behaviors, maybe we can disrupt it in some way to increase resistance to the plant. So we found that aphids introduce certain proteins into the plant in the day and other proteins at the night. So far, everybody who has studied these aphid proteins have only studied it at one time. They haven't paid attention to the day versus the night. And so we found that, and we're planning on submitting it pretty soon. But now that led me to another interesting thing to see whether do aphids even sleep. So we are still struggling with figuring out how do insects sleep. Maybe if you can make the insects sleep for a longer time or stop them from sleeping, then they won't feed on your plant. That's a simple thing that will make them go away. They won't sleep, and if they can't sleep, they will go to another plant where they can sleep.
Absolutely. So, Dr. Vamsi, now we are almost at of our conversation. So, the last words of wisdom to all the researchers does not have to be PhD or postdoc or early faculty, but some words out of your own experience which stands true for all the researchers, what they should aim for.
Well, like I said, I think the most important skill a researcher should have now is to learn the ability to write and communicate. So do that. Somehow improve your skill of learning how to write and communicate with a wide audience well. When it comes to research, be persevere. There are things that will happen which are not under your control, but there is nothing you can do. You just have to stick through it at certain times so that you can achieve the goal that you want to achieve. These things will not happen directly from A to Z. It's not one smooth step. Sometimes you have to go all over the place before you get to your outcome, and do that. And another thing I would say is at least what I have found is every single idea that I've had when it comes to any research problem, somebody seems to have already have done it. But do not let that hold you back. Keep coming up with brand new ideas, and do not let that make you frustrated. Oh, I have an ideas, but somebody already published. No, no. It's
Yeah.
still, because your ideas will still be novel. You're in the process of learning, and you will reach a certain stage where the ideas that you have, nobody will have. So keep going through that, keep creating more and more ideas. That is the key of any researcher.
Yes.
Curiosity. You have to be curious continuously, otherwise you will not achieve what you want to achieve.
Absolutely. And that being said, I will say to all the viewers that if you want to contact Dr. Vamsi, please feel free to contact, or if you want Empowering Science Foundation to bridge you with our researcher celebrities, write it to us. And stay tuned, stay passionate about your research, as Dr. Vamsi said. And now I will say thank you, Dr. Vamsi, for taking time out and sharing the journey with us and motivating and giving guidance to the upcoming researchers.
Yes, thank you so much for this opportunity. I've not had many opportunities to speak like this, and it feels very good to speak the mind, and hope that at least somebody somewhere will find what I said useful.
Yes, absolutely. That's what we aim towards to. And that is the entire idea of about having researcher celebrity conversations, so that people can interact or build a niche where all the researchers can come together and talk about it. Not going for conferences, but watching all these videos and then connecting within where they really feel that someone can help them. And
Yes.
you did a great job. Thank you very much, Dr. Vamsi.
Thank you. Thank you, Raja.